So hello, gentlemen, and thank you very much for talking to us in this strange world of Zoom conversation we've all been propelled into. Um, and a shout out to all of the board members of the INSS who are listening in. So I will briefly introduce you two gentlemen, make you sufficiently uncomfortable for the beginning of our conversation. And then I will go on to badger you with some questions, true to my position as an Israeli journalist. And then Amos will take over to take some questions from our audience. So again, thank you so much for being here. The Honorable Yusuf Al-Taiba is, of course, the United Arab Emirates Ambassador to Washington, very, very well known and respected since the Bush administration, by the way. 3 years ago, in recognition of his outstanding service as ambassador, he was also promoted to the position of Minister of State. He's one of the architects of the Abraham Accords, and in the words of Ari Shavit in the Times Literary Supplement, he is the quintessential Arab diplomat of the new age, exuding practicality. So, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. And Amos Yadlin is, of course, the retired Major General Amos Yadlin, the man who dedicated his life to Israel's security, is now the executive director of the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, served 40 years in the Israeli Defense Forces, 10 of which he spent as the IDF Chief of Staff, the former commander of the Air Force and the Israeli Military Intelligence. And that was the formal part of our introductions, but we have so much to talk about, gentlemen, so I will dive right into it, if I may, and start talking about the fact that you two have been actually friends for many years. And I think that symbolizes the relationship between the UAE and Israel. It has been going on for a long time, very clandestine, and now is coming out to light. So can I begin by asking you, Mr. Ambassador, can you share with us the answer to the question that I think many Israelis would like to know? Why now? Why is this the good time to sign the peace accords with Israel?
So thank you, Uni. Thank you for having me. Thank you, General Yadlin. It's a pleasure. And yes, General Yadlin and I go way back. We run into each other in Congress. We run into each other at events, and we've had a healthy discussion for the last 10 years. And now here we are having it at his center. So it's kind of a fitting way to begin the day. At some point, I want to come back and ask General Yadlin about his feedback from his trip to Abu Dhabi. There's a lot of first-time things taking place right now. And I think this is the first time a big high-level delegation from a very prominent Israeli think tank visits Abu Dhabi openly and had meetings openly. And so if we can just start with a quick readout from General Yadlin about what it was like, how did it feel? What are his impressions from that visit? And then I'll answer the why now question.
This is an experienced diplomat. He immediately moved the ball to my yard.
Deflects the question. I didn't even start with the tough ones yet. Okay.
Uni, I plan to deflect all the tough questions to General Yadlin. I'm saying that out front right now.
The visit was very successful. We were received warmly and openly by the leadership over there, our colleagues in the think tank community, the Emirate Policy Center, and the foreign minister, which represent the government. We were not surprised, but we were happy to see a modern country with moderate people, very open, very eager to learn, very reach out for a discussion and exchange of ideas. And we were impressed with a country that looking into the future, maybe trying to cooperate with another small country in the Middle East together to have a better future based on peace and stability and not on war and radicalism. This was a great surprise for us as we came from the Middle East that we know.
It was mainly annexation units. It was annexation that made us reach this decision in the way we did and in the time we did. I believe that annexation was going to have a profoundly negative impact in our part of the world. It was going to cause a very negative reaction to Israel. It was going to put Jordan under pressure. It was going to force the United States to defend what is a very unpopular decision in the region. And finally, it was going to risk all the progress that we have been making in terms of opening up with Israel. Over the past several years, you've seen visibly Israeli athletes participating in sports competitions. You've seen, I was actually at the stadium when the Israeli delegation walked in for the Special Olympics World Games. You saw that there was approval for an Israeli pavilion at the Expo 2020, which is now taking place in 2021. But you see all these movements overtly happening, as part of a strategy. Annexation was going to ruin that. Annexation was going to reverse that. And so we tried to find ways to prevent annexation. And then we wrote that op-ed in, I think it was Yediot in mid-June, if I'm not mistaken. And that's what sparked the debate. So that op-ed did exactly what we wanted it to do. It triggered a debate inside Israel and forced people to ask themselves, which is more important, annexation or improving the relationship of Israel with a variety of Arab countries? And I think we got the right outcome. We prevented a negative outcome. We created a win-win. And I think it's going to open potentially a lot of cooperation, not just on the economic side, but just think on science and technology. Think about education. Think about, we've already talked to groups that work with groups like the Special Olympics. So what I think is happening is a reflection of a changing mindset in the Middle East. What General Yadlin just described as a very welcome and open environment, I think that's only going to increase. And look, we're not going to agree on everything. No two countries agree on everything. But we can start.
We don't agree amongst ourselves about anything, so that's fine.
Yeah. And so I think it's just, it's time for having a relationship where you can have a healthy discussion about things you agree on, about things you don't agree on. But there's going to be benefits on the non-political side that I think we have ignored for a very long time.
And we're going to dive into that as well. But when you talk about that, to the extent that you can say in the Middle East that something is forever, do you think that the annexation has been taken off the table for good? Because in front of the Israeli audience, the Prime Minister assured them that it has been, quote unquote, suspended.
So that's a question for Israel. But my sense is there was a poll taken in Israel a week after the op-ed came out. A week after the agreement. It was about third week of August, if I'm not mistaken. 80% of Israelis said, yes, we prefer normalization to annexation. 80% of Israelis. You just said you guys don't agree on anything. 80% of you agree that this is a preferred outcome. So as long as we're able to demonstrate that this is a good outcome for everyone, for Israel, for the UAE, for the region and the United States, then yes, I think annexation will not be entertained. But that's on us. We have to demonstrate that this is a success.
So General Yadlin, I don't want to pull in the ambassador into the inner trappings of Israeli politics. He has enough to deal with in Washingtonian politics. But, there might be an Israeli prime minister from the right who tries to rehatch this idea of annexation. It will of course, become more difficult in a Biden administration, but that is possible.
I think the right term is suspension. It's not, forever. However, and this is very important, the price of annexation is now going up. It used to be, having trouble in the relation with Egypt and Jordan. And now you have to sacrifice another, I hope, very good relation. So the price of annexation is going up. What is important in this agreement is that we, again, after 25 years, having peace as the main objective of the policy. We forgot about peace because of the Second Intifada and the freeze of the peace process. And we were looking at security as a minimum achievement and forgot about the dream of peace. What the UAE, the Israel agreement have done, it's brought peace again to be something that you talk about as a positive, very positive objective. And I think if we speak about peace, the two governments are aiming at a war on peace, a different model of peace. I heard about it in our visit in the UAE. The foreign minister has spoke about a different model of peace that will have a lot of economic cooperation, technology cooperation, medicine cooperation, agricultural cooperation, people-to-people peace. exchange of students, exchange of tourists, and this may be a benchmark for the other countries that have called peace with us when they will see the peace dividend.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, and I would use that as a segue to ask you about that, Mr. Ambassador, because of course Israelis, I mean, you were born in Egypt, your mother is Egyptian. When Israel thinks of the Israeli-Egyptian peace accord, its enormous strategic importance notwithstanding, we always call it, as General Yadlin said, a cold peace. This has all the trappings of a very warm relationship. This is, from the Israeli point of view, we're seeing this as a very warm relationship. Can you speak at the heart of that? What lies at the heart of that warmness towards Israel? We're not used to it. That's why I'm asking.
So I'm also married to an Egyptian, so I'm surrounded by the Egyptian sort of attitude towards Israel. But the truth is, Egypt has fought several wars with Israel. The UAE hasn't. Egypt shares a border, and we don't. And so we don't bring the history that Egypt and Jordan does. I think the reason we believe we're going to have a war and peace, we have a young population, not attached to history, spend most of their time thinking about their future, and they see opportunities with Israel. They see excitement, they see enthusiasm. I know several of my friends and colleagues, especially younger ones, who are really excited to go and visit and see this new country, right? They want to learn about Israel. Now, I hope Israel also wants to learn about us. I hope Israel brings kind of an open mind to dealing with a country that they really don't know or understand. I hope they get to know our values, our culture, our history, who we are, and do not, the mistake I see a lot in America is everyone thinks the Arab world is this monolithic block and we're all the same. We're not at all. And so I hope the Israelis are equally enthusiastic about getting to know us as we are enthusiastic about getting to know them.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us, General Yadlin, all those peacemakers over the years that have said that there cannot be a normalization with the Arab world without some sort of progress with the Palestinians, they were all wrong?
They didn't really appreciate the change in the Arab world. And the change has to do mostly with the Arab Spring. Suddenly, the Palestinian issue that used to be the #1 priority of everybody become not the main problem. A civil war in Syria with 10 million refugees, 500,000 people killed, a civil war in Libya, what is happening in Iraq. The whole Arab world is in a turmoil, and the Palestinians cannot stop where history is going. This is one. Second is the fact that it's not only the leadership, the propaganda of a regime, the education that people are getting, anti-Israeli doctrine is all over. This machine brought to the young people all over the Arab world some new perspective. Suddenly, Israelis and Arabs are speaking. They are not speaking in diplomatic meetings. They are not tourists, but Twitter, Facebook, and other internet social networks brought the people together. I'm not saying that the Arab street totally supporting now Israel and not the Palestinians, but some question mark enable leaders that wanted to have peace and stability over war and terror to have their street, especially their street with them.
Mr. Ambassador, the Israelis are still very excited about this relationship, and they're hearing you, I think many of them for the first time. Could you maybe walk us through or tell us a little bit, give us a little bit of the, what happened behind the scenes as you realized that this is actually going to happen, actually going to be signed?
So like I said, it was really an attempt to subvert annexation. And what we felt we were doing, we traded up. We offered what we thought is a much better deal. The White House, I think, saw it the same way, became very excited, enthusiastic, and thought it was a much better outcome for everyone involved. So once everyone got involved, I think they saw this as a win-win. Negotiating the actual deal really took somewhere between 4 and 5 weeks. And then it was just hammering out details like statements and language and things like that. So getting to yes was very quick, was very easy. I remember calling some folks back home and I said, all right, this is happening. Are you guys ready? Are we on board? Yeah, let's go. I mean, there was no hesitation. This was something that we felt was good for us. that was good for the region, that was going to happen anyway at some point. Maybe it happens 5 years from now. But I think we got the best outcome we could have possibly gotten at the time. And I think we're still excited about it because I think there's so much potential. Today was the first direct flight. I saw images of Israeli tourists landing in Dubai. And I just think mindsets are changing, Unit. I think attitudes are changing. And the question you just asked General Yadlin about, the peacemakers, were they wrong? I think they were right at that time frame. Back then, that was the approach. That approach hasn't worked, so we're going to try a different approach. One that benefits us, I think benefits Israel, definitely benefits the US and the larger Middle East.
I want to ask you, if I may, about the F-35 fighter jets. You probably know that the Israeli Prime Minister is under public scrutiny for denying it for a few weeks that Israel agreed to the sale, and finally 2 weeks ago, turning it on its head and saying that he eventually agreed not to block it. May I ask you the Emirate version of this story, of the F-35 story?
Just one edit. It was actually Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, who was saying that they were okay with it after having a series of conversations with the United States about preserving QME. So QME, you have the resident expert over there in General Yadlin.
Was that at the beginning of the process, Mr. Ambassador, or when was this on the timeline, what you're saying?
With the United States, so most of our conversations were with the United States. That conversation began after the Abraham Accords. Just to note, after, yes. And by the way, we've been trying to acquire the F-35 for 6 years. 6 years. So this started a long time ago. It never made progress. We felt that the Abraham Accords unlocked or created the opening for this to occur. There are a couple other items that we're trying to get that we've been trying to get for 10 years. Also held up because of QME.
A very big achievement on your end. But I think what I'm trying to ask, and forgive my Israeli journalist badgering here, but would the UAE have initiated this whole process had you not known that Israel would give even a tacit nod of the head to that sale?
I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer. I just felt that we had confidence in the U.S. administration helping us get there. What the U.S. administration does with the Israelis ultimately is, that's a question for them. But I felt that we had a good sense of most of this being able to get through, not just the administration, but also Congress, as long as it addresses Israel's QME issues.
So you talk about that conversation that the Israeli Prime Minister and the Defense Minister agreed to this. You're saying it's not from the outset, it's after the accords themselves were signed.
Correct.
Are you at all worried that the new Congress, the one that will be sworn in January 5th, will try to block this in any way, put any hurdles in the way of confirming the agreements?
I don't think so. I think as long as Israel signals that they're okay with it and QME is indeed preserved, I think there's much less space for it to be blocked. I think as long as the process was followed, which it was, there's much less space for it to be blocked. So as long as you address that this followed the right process and it does not affect Israeli QME, there's little room for people to block it if those two arguments are taken away.
So let's ask our resident expert, as you call him, General Yadlin, about the qualitative military edge. Almost, of course, something very important for the Israelis. How does Israel ensure that its QME still stands?
Yeah, I think vis-a-vis the UAE, the Israelis are quite sure that it will not harm our security. As the ambassador have said, we've never been in a war. It's a faraway country. It's not a huge country. And we basically, and this is one of the reasons that we reached today this agreement strategically, is that we face the same enemies. The same enemies, if it is Iran or Turkey trying to have hegemony in the Middle East, and we find ourselves with our friend, the pragmatic Arab countries, against them. So the problem with the QME is that it can open the way to sell F-35s and other advanced weapons to other countries that are more concerned to Israel. And the ambassador have said that the UAE have asked for these systems, weapon systems, for many, many years. And I think you cannot remove it from the fact that agreement was reached. It's making sense to sell advanced weapons to countries that are in peace. But the fact that it was done immediately after the agreement can show you that this is, in a way, de facto part of the agreement. And I see the agreement as 3 pillars: normalization and even peace, as the ambassador have said, suspension of annexation. In my analytical view, 2 achievements, 2 big achievements, and in a way, maybe a price in the future when Israeli QME will be challenged by another countries. We have mechanism to talk with the Americans about QME. By the way, there is a law in Congress which gives Israel even kind of a veto on every sale. And the fact that Israel feel comfortable with this sale is that the UAE is not an enemy. The UAE is supporting the stability. And in the future, Israel will get some systems that can keep its QME still enough to cope with some changes that I don't see happening in the UAE in the future.
And I don't mind dragging you into the hot water of Israeli public discourse, but do you think that there was enough of a consideration of that as part of the Abraham Accords, of the issue of the F-35, enough of a discussion in Israel in the top brass?
You can drag me to the Israeli discussion because I think the procedure and the way you reach an important decision should be done by the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, and the Foreign Minister at the minimum, because there are very crucial decisions that you may make mistakes. In the history of Israel, you can point on many, many mistakes that were done when people got to the decision alone. The Prime Minister in our democracy is first among equals. And I always bring the example of the last unity government in the 80s, when there were 3 prime ministers in rotation and ex-prime minister, Shamir Peres and Mr. Rabin. And every important decision was done in this small forum that trust each other. Unfortunately, the trust today in the Israeli politics is less than it used to be.
That's an understatement. Ambassador Al-Otaiba, you know, the difference between Israeli politics and American politics, they have elections once every 4 years. We have 4 elections in a year. So I will use that as a segue to talk about, I keep talking about it, so maybe you'll want to pull back from the Accords. I want to use this as a segue to discuss the new administration. Obviously, the UAE has had its reservations about the JCPOA, the Iran deal. Israel's been more vocal in its objection to it. What's at stake if the new Biden administration, come January, tries to return to the JCPOA, as it has already said it will attempt to do?
So our view of the JCPOA was it was a good deal. It just did not go far enough. It did not get to address all the issues that bother us and Israel. And we think there should be a deal with Iran. By all means, let's have a negotiation, but let's address all the problems, not just one of them. Let's not just take the nuclear issue and forget about all the other problems that we have to deal with today. We haven't talked about missiles. We haven't talked about proxies. We haven't talked about interference. And these are all issues that create just as much of a problem for us as it do for Israel. Why are we not talking about them? So now we have a new administration, but you also have a lot of leverage on Iran, whether it's sanctions, whether it's COVID, whether it's low oil prices, whether it's the region and what it's going through in general. Why are we not using this leverage to get a better deal? Why are we not putting ourselves in a position to address all of the problems that we face from Iran? So there's no one who's standing and saying, no, we shouldn't have a deal. We should just have a deal that addresses all our issues.
So you're basically saying that the Biden administration should thank the Trump administration for putting them in a better position for the negotiation?
I think they are in a better position for a negotiation. Whether they want to thank them or not, that's up to them.
Ever the diplomat. Can I ask you about a report that came out by Israeli journalist Barak Ravid on Axios saying that the Gulf states and Israel are coordinating flooding Iran with sanctions come January 20th, coordinating it with the Trump administration, of course.
Yeah, I don't know how much coordinating we're doing. I talk to the Trump administration very regularly. They're doing this with or without us, so I'm not sure that we're the reason or we're the cause here. But I think the Trump administration has a very, very simple view of Iran, and they are, going to go as long as they can until January 20th to make sure Iran is not in a position to, wreak havoc in the region. And so, that's not a surprise.
So what is the difference? I mean, how does the new Biden administration change all that? Or does it change all that?
The problem, Unity, is I don't know. We're not allowed to talk to the Biden administration. They're not allowed to talk to us. So it's hard to get their actual sense of thinking. What I'm hearing from friends is they're really going to be primarily focused on domestic issues, on COVID, on the economy, and a lot of things. I'm sure they're going to, have a review about what to do on JCPOA. I just don't have any insight into it because we're not able to speak to them directly.
Are you worried at all? Are you concerned?
Not really, no. I think, if the Senate stays Republican, I think it's going to create guardrails for President Biden on what he can do both domestically and internationally. So I'm not worried. Now you have a team of your allies in the region all saying the same thing about Iran. So I'm not worried, and I think we'll make our voice clear to them. We'll see what we can do. One of the other observations or shortcomings of JCPOA is you're really sitting down and negotiating with Iran about the future of the Middle East without really having any of the countries from the Middle East at the table, right? If we're going to negotiate the security of our part of the world, we should be there. And so, there are some technical shortcomings and issues that need to be on the agenda of the future discussions with Iran, but we also need a certain number of regional players to, voice their views in the middle of this conversation as well. This is what we have been arguing for.
You're saying there might be guardrails because the Senate will be Republican. We're all watching Georgia. It's funny. It's a funny thing. We're sitting talking about the Middle East, but all watching Georgia. It can well be a 50-50 Senate.
It could be, yes.
Tiebreaker with the vice president who's a tiebreaker.
And I think from now until January 5th, the entire country's political, environment is going to be focused on those two races in Georgia.
And if that changes, does that, raise any concerns with you?
It doesn't raise concern, but I think it creates a better sense of checks and balances of, a divided government means, the president will probably stay to a more central lane in everything, in domestic and international politics. And I think that's healthy for the United States. I think it's good for the United States to be in the center. I think it's good for the United States to be sort of working with all of its partners. So I'm not worried.
General Yadlin, are there opportunities here as well? Will the new administration try and expand these normalization accords with the Sunni states? Between Israel, of course, and the Sunni states.
Let's go back to Iran because I think it's important. We have, first of all, to know and to remember that both administrations in the US, Republican as Democrats, the strategic objection is that to Iran will not have a nuclear bomb. This is very, very important when we look forward the Biden administration. Then we have to understand that they think that they have a better policy to achieve it. And we think that there are a different policy to achieve the goal, which is a common goal to the Sunni Arabs, to the Americans, and to the Israelis. The Biden future administration will have two camps, Democrats. One of them will call to go back to the days that Obama have left, with the JCPOA, with UN Security Council Resolution 2334. And these people will try to continue the day that Obama left. This is not good for the Middle East. It's not good for Israel. There are much more realistic Democrats, I know many of them, that understand that 5 years has passed and the situation in the Middle East is different. Some expectation on Iran behaviors, found to be false. The Israeli Mossad found some evidence that Iran is developing weapons and not only nuclear program. And the fact that they don't like Trump doesn't say that Trump haven't created very good leverages for them for the future negotiation. I see 3 different times. There is the 70 days that Trump is still in the helm, and he can—
Counting the votes, I'm kidding. Yes.
He can, you spoke about sanctions, it can be some other actions that Trump wants to conclude his term. Then there is the time until May 2021, nomination, other priorities of the administration, mostly domestic, the economy, COVID-19, the racial tension, and then China. And in May, we have the Iranian election. And who knows when the Israeli election. So I think only in May, we will see the Americans trying to negotiate with the Iranians. But the Iranians are not where they were left in when Trump left the agreement. They already breached the agreement. So freeze for freeze or some other arrangement, there is a lot of room for negotiation. From the Israeli side, we should not be in the place that we have been in 2013. When we say, okay, you negotiate with Iran, we are not there. We have to have a dialogue with the new administration, with our allies in the Middle East, and bring our concern to the negotiation. On the fact of Biden administration supporting the normalization, I think they will continue. Even before he was the president elected, during the campaign, he supported the move. It is, once again, a bipartisan approach in America to promote peace in the Middle East, to promote stability, modernization, moderate regimes, moderate elements. So I don't see the Biden administration putting any obstacle in a future relation between Israel and the UAE.
Ambassador Al-Otaiba, after the UAE took the lead on this, what are the next countries in line? Do you think Saudi Arabia could be next?
So you know it's very bad form for an ambassador to comment on other countries' objectives and priorities. I don't know which countries are ready or when they'll be ready, but I can tell you that what we did kind of broke the ice, broke the taboo that this is no longer impossible. It can be done, and it can be done with an incredible amount of support and acceptance from around the world, not just on both the Democrat and Republican side in the US, but look at the reactions from Europe, look at the reactions from the region, look at the reaction even as far as India. So this was a very welcome development. Bahrain came very quickly after us, Sudan came quickly after them, which tells you that this is not an aberration. This is not, one or two rogue countries going out of line and doing something unconventional. This is a trend. This is a pattern. When each country decides the time is right for them, ultimately depends on that country, depends on public opinion, depends on domestic politics, depends on the leadership, right? But we've proven that this can be done, and this can be done, successfully. Now the rest is now up to the other countries.
What do you say to Israelis who are basically saying, for many years we have been told that we can't have any normalization with the Arab states without the Palestinian issue being resolved. This proves to us, this deal with the UAE, this accord, proves that we don't need to move forward with the Palestinian issue.
So we still believe that the two-state solution is the only game in town, right? It doesn't, whether you put this first or that first is irrelevant, but at the end of the day, the Abraham Accords created space for a two-state solution. We do need to move, you need to move forward with a two-state solution. But at the end of the day, all we can do is create the space. It's going to take the leadership from both Israel and Palestine, hopefully with some encouragement from the United States, to get to where they need to go. At the end of the day, the Palestinians are not going away. This issue is not going away until it gets resolved. And to all our Israeli friends who think that, the Abraham Accords ignores the Palestinian issue. No, we're going to have very tough conversations with the Israeli government about Palestinians and about the Palestinian state. Just because we agree on Iran and Turkey and a range of other issues does not mean we have to agree on everything else. So there are going to be tough conversations, but this requires diplomacy, and more importantly, it requires a willingness and political courage from the leaders to make the compromises that you have to make to get this issue resolved.
Do you see the leaders on both sides having that courage, the current leaders?
Not right now.
Yonit, I think, unlike the conventional wisdom, that this put the Palestinians even more far from peace, I think this agreement enabled the Palestinians. We are closer now to negotiation than we have been before the accord. Because the Palestinians usually have three strong cards in their perspective. It's first the Arab Peace Initiative that gives them veto on normalization. Second, the assumption if there is no two-state solution, Israel is going to have one state, and this is not what Israel wants. And third is violence. The Palestinians lost all these cards are now weaker. And this can bring them to the negotiation, because when they thought that their cards are so strong, they never compromise on anything. And now, if they will see once again the dividends of peace, and the Sunni Arabs will encourage them to close the gap with Israel, I think the chances of peace are higher after this accord than before.
I would want to ask you, Mr. Ambassador, actually my two final questions before I have to go and anchor the news in this country of milk, honey, and fresh news item every 60 seconds, and before I turn on the torch back to you, Amos, two things. Just to make sure that if there's anything important that you want to say to the Israeli public today. And the second question, I can promise you that Tel Aviv weather and Jerusalem weather is much better than Washington weather, to ask you when you yourself will actually be coming here.
So the first question, I want the Israeli people to know that we are optimistic about this relationship, that we are enthusiastic about this relationship. If you take all the difficult and challenging policy issues aside, Iran, Palestine, Turkey, Yemen war, Syria war, having a relationship with Israel is ultimately good for both countries. Having a dialogue, having trade, having investment, having research, having a joint space program, it's good for our two countries on its own. We're excited to get to know this country that we really only see through TV and through the media. I hope Israelis are equally excited to get to know us as people, not just as a policy, not just as, shiny buildings and, nice airports. I hope they get to know us and, who we are and our values and our heritage and our histories. So I think if that happens, we're going to move in the right direction. As for me, I actually really want to come to Israel, and I promised a good friend of mine that I will go with him when the time is right. Just as soon as COVID is a little more under control and things are, look somewhat more normal, I'm really excited to come visit Israel.
Let's say inshallah and amen to that. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for this conversation. General Yadlin, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, gentlemen. And your conversation continues while I go read the headlines of the news. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yonit, very much. And see you at 8 o'clock on the news. Max Blankfield from Texas, who is one of our supporters, is asking, how can the UAE help engage Europeans with Israel?
So I was really optimistic when we saw most of the reactions from Europe. I think the European leadership welcomed this move. They welcomed the idea of normalization. They welcomed the idea of suspending annexation. So I think you have a lot of goodwill in Europe. But I think Europe is also, like many other countries right now, really just dealing with their own issues on either terrorism or on COVID. Brexit is still messy. So like everyone else, they're preoccupied, I think, with their own set of issues. But I think on the Abraham Accords, on engagement, they're in a very good place. We'll see where it goes. but I think the Europeans can play always a positive role in helping bring this team together.
Anyone else? I can't see the chat. Danny? Okay. Okay, one of our supporters who is doing a lot of business saying that he compliment the businessmen in your country, your Emirates, that the beginning look very promising, and the pace of advancing forward is amazing. You announced on the Abraham Accord in August, you signed it in September, and in October, all the details, agreements were there, and now the businesses are coming. So I hope that very soon the two countries will enjoy, and it will help us to get out from the downside of the COVID-19 that caused some damage to both of our economies.
I'll tell you a funny story, General. I was talking to a young gentleman who works in the Abu Dhabi Economic Department about 2 weeks ago. And he was supposed to do some paperwork and send an approval to me or something. But he called back about 3 or 4 days later. And the first thing he says was, I'm really sorry, it took a long time. I was supposed to have this for you about 3 or 4 days ago. He goes, but we've been completely overwhelmed. I said, overwhelmed with what? He said, the number of Israeli companies that are contacting us and want to set up businesses and companies in Abu Dhabi is really overwhelming. We're dealing with just purely Israeli companies right now setting up shop in Abu Dhabi. So I took that as a very good sign. When we cannot keep up with Israeli requests and demands for setting up businesses in the UAE, it means that it's already going to be a warm peace. It's not going to be a warm peace. It already is a warm peace. The potential on the business, trade, investment side is you're starting with a blank canvas. You're starting with a completely blank canvas. And I think the opportunities are amazing. And we're really excited about this part of it.
Anthony Bloom is asking, have you got any response from the Chinese? And I can ask from the Russians.
The answer is, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay, another question is about the Arab Street, not in Abu Dhabi, not in Dubai, but I guess you have knowledge and you pay attention to the Arab Street in Cairo, in Amman, even in Damascus. What are the reactions?
So in the street, I don't think it has been very well received. I don't think it's a very popular decision because, again, some of these countries have histories and emotional baggage when it comes to Israel. But when you talk about just young Arabs, it's really interesting. I see there's a poll that comes out every year. It just came out about a month ago, and they only poll young Arabs. And young Arabs are surprisingly not focused on just what's the problem with Israel or the two-state solution. Almost every year, consistently, the importance of resolving the Palestinian issue among young Arabs moves further and further down. Doesn't mean it's a lot less important. It just means that they are preoccupied with things that young people are preoccupied with everywhere. So number one on the list of what is most important to young Arabs, rising cost of living, corruption, employment opportunities. The Palestinian issue is number seven, not even in the top 5. So this is what I mean when I talk about the region is changing, the mindsets are changing, the attitudes are changing. People want to see a better future. People look for prosperity, and they don't look at Israel through just, they look at what is happening in their part of the world and in their neighborhood, and can I get a job? Can I feed my family? That's what's preoccupying young Arabs everywhere.
There's a question about the relation in the Gulf. Qatar became a source of concern to its neighbors, and about 4 years ago, you declared some kind of diplomatic siege vis-a-vis Qatar and some sanctions. How can you see the crisis resolved?
So I don't think it gets resolved anytime soon, simply because I don't think there's been any introspection, right? When you are a country the size of Qatar, right, and 4 important countries cut ties off with you and say, we don't want to deal with you. And here are the reasons why, and here's the demands, and here's what bothers us. If you don't ask yourself, if you're Qatari and you do not ask yourself why this happened, what caused this, you know, why are all these countries upset with us? That introspection process did not occur. They continued to play the victim. They continued to pretend to be bullied. And so they didn't address the root causes of the problem, General. And until you address the root causes of the problem, I really don't think this is going to get solved. Let me take it away from the Qatar issue and move to a sort of more strategic analysis. Our part of the world right now is divided into 2 camps. One camp who promotes more ideology, more religion, more radicalization, and injects religion into every debate. And it's Turkey, Iran, and Qatar. And then you have a bunch of countries, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, who are focused on a civil approach, on a pragmatic approach, on quality of governance approach, who are thinking about their future, not their past. And this is the big fault line in the Middle East today. This is our equivalent of capitalism versus communism, right? This is the defining conflict of ideologies in our part of the world. We think our approach is better for us, better for our societies, better for our kids, better for education, better for science. And there are some countries who just prefer to look backwards, focus on their history, focus on what they used to be like, focusing on religion and extremism. And I don't think that dilemma or that conflict is going to get resolved anytime soon.
I think what you just have said is so important, because relations between countries and states are based on values, interest, and trust. And you describe so beautifully the values that we are sharing, not only the interest, not the economic interest, not the defense interest, which we share, but the values. And I think this is wonderful. I think the trust that the 2 of us are sharing, and the trust that I got from your leader, Mohammed bin Zayed, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, is now, due to your appearance, will be shared with the Israeli people, that I'm sure enjoy your analysis, enjoy your view, and have a lot of trust in you. So thank you for having devoted your precious time to us this morning, and hoping to see you personally in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem sooner than later.
General, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you again, this time publicly, overtly, in front of everyone to see. And thank you for your friendship. And I look forward to working with you. And I promise you, and I promise you, Neat, I will be in Israel at some point. And I look forward to meeting you in person when that happens.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir.